Hi, good afternoon. Or, well, I don't know when it is for you. For me, it's afternoon, but it may be morning or whatever. I'm Kevin Horst. I'm the mental health specialist for Northeast Metro 916. And first of all, I'd really like to welcome you to working with the district. I'm really sorry that it's kind of started with the distance learning thing, but while I don't like the decision, I certainly do understand it. And I really hope that this job turns out to be as um, fun and challenging in a good way for you as it has been for me. Just a tiny bit about me. I've been with the district about 6 years. I've been doing, I'm a psychologist, not a school psychologist, the weird kind. And I've been doing this kind of work for, none of your business, long time. And most of my career, I worked in mental health day treatment programs where kids came to these agencies instead of going to school because of the severity of their mental health problems. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to work in places like that was that I came, as part of my job, part of my career, I did the outpatient therapy thing where people came to meet with me once a week. And I quickly realized that people in schools have a much greater ability to impact kids that I really wanted to work with than I did. You people, when school is in session, see kids 6 hours a day. I would see them 1 hour a week. And I was really jealous of your ability to impact their lives in a way that I could not. So the thing we're going to be talking about today is the escalation, de-escalation process. And there is a ton of information in here. I'm not going to go over every bullet point on all the slides because that's just ridiculous and way too much to kind of contain or learn about at any one time. So I am really just going to hit the highlights. I meant to put my email address in here and I didn't. It is just khorst@916schools.org. Please, if you have any questions or comments or want to call me out on something and say, hey, I think that's BS, back that up, I would love that for a couple of reasons. One is that it really helps me think. There have been a couple times when people have done that and I thought, oh yeah, well, that really makes sense. So I hope that you do that. And now the fun part, I am going to try to figure out how to present my screen. And another thing, you could email me. I'm just on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard you're laughing at me fumbling around trying to present or figure out how to present my screen. Okay, that doesn't look good. That looks better. So hopefully that'll be doing it. Okay, trauma and de-escalation. The other 2 sessions or 3 sessions, Cara has been involved in. This one I'm on my own. This material is by Pete Singer and other folks that he works with through Advanced Trauma Consulting, and they have been an excellent resource for our district, particularly in terms of supporting staff with some of the vicarious or secondary traumatic stress that we experience, and we're going to talk about that one in the next session. So the objectives for this are to recognize and discuss the process of escalation. If you work in this job for more than 2 days, you will definitely see students and scholars escalate. Another one would be discuss the impact of trauma on escalation and de-escalation and identify several practical steps to help with de-escalation. So this is really, really basic. Escalation is when kids go from being calm to escalated and quiet to loud and respectful to disrespectful, and those kinds of things. And the last one is just when kids are calm, their mind can be engaged and they can communicate with you and be in conversation. And when they are escalated, they cannot. One of the things that I said in a training one time to a lot of people, like 200 or more people in a school district, was there are 2 things that make people, the 2 things that I think make people the dumbest, that make us the least able to use our brains. And that is when we are under a high degree of stress, and the other is putting on hockey skates. Many of the people in that room laughed And then, except there was this little group right down to my right that didn't laugh, and they kind of nervously looked over at this one guy who was not laughing at all. He had his arms crossed, and he was looking at me. I looked at him and said, "You're the hockey coach, aren't you?" And he was. But he let me live, so I appreciated that. But people cannot learn when they're under stress, and we'll talk more about that in the kind of the brain process that goes into that. But I would really encourage you, when kids are having a very, very hard time, don't even try to teach them anything at that point other than how to calm themselves down and get re-engaged. This is just a more specific picture of what happens during the escalation process. Sometimes escalation happens very, very quickly. And if you look at the top line, people can go from calm to peak in a heartbeat, and you really won't see any of those smaller steps. At other times, there's those smaller steps like activation and acceleration are noticeable. Some examples of that are where a student might be working on something that's challenging for them, and then they start tapping. And they just do the tapping thing, or they start to look around, or there's increased body movement. And those are times where you might kind of step over and say, "Hey, what's going on? Can I give you a hand with that?" And then again, at other times, things just get very, very big in a great big hurry. And there really aren't those kind of warning signs that things are escalated. Down in the very last line in the light blue column, the EF just refers to emotional functioning deficits. And that's just where the person's ability to regulate their emotions decrease, and they just don't have the ability to kind of manage their emotions and by extension their bodies. This is a really quick kind of YouTube video on flipping your lid, and yeah, if you just take a moment to watch that right now, put this on pause and take a moment to watch that, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. Welcome back if you really did it. This is just a kind of picture about what happens, and it's just this kind of cute little visual to give you an idea of what happens between the kind of spinal cord and brainstem and amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, the smart part of your brain. And then when you flip your lid and your hand goes up in the air, the prefrontal cortex is just a long way away from your brainstem. And when you're stressed out, this is where all the activity in your brain is going on. And you really, really do not have the emotional control to manage those situations well, because the part of your brain responsible for good decision making just isn't working. Interestingly, the prefrontal cortex does not develop in people. In girls, it kind of develops around 17 to 19, somewhere around there. It's later in boys. With boys, it doesn't really develop until early 20s, early to mid 20s, with the exception of my youngest son. He's 31 and I'm waiting. And you can tell him I said that. Another thing that really causes people a whole lot of, and moving into the trauma part now, poverty has a great impact on people. Poverty is a traumatic experience for people, and it's more than just financial. Kids who grow up in poverty are emotionally and cognitively and physically and energetically behind people who come from more affluent families. The emotional part comes from just the drain that it takes on your body and your mind to figure out where financial resources are going to come from, and the stress that causes. I'm assuming you guys are like me, and there have been times in your life when you've been really, really worried about money, and I'm sure you remember what that's like. It just really saps you. Another thing that it does with kids is it means that kids are thinking about other things and not their math. So if kids are worried about how their parents are going to be when they get home because they're worried about the lights getting turned off or the heat getting turned off or not having enough to eat, It's going to make it really, really difficult for them to focus on their math. And it's really important that we do the best we can to be aware of those outside factors that may be impacting a kid's level of trauma. I think this is a really, really important slide. So this is what happens to kids when they experience trauma. And trauma, I think it's been covered in a previous one that Kara went over. But it could be one big incident, physical or sexual abuse, one-time thing, or it can be kind of the death by 1,000 cuts, very kind of small traumatic incidents that happen very, very frequently throughout one's life. In typical development, what kids learn is that adults are stable, and I learn as a child that I can have a nurturing adult that takes care of my needs. Again, in typical development, kids learn that the world is predictable and can be development, and generally good things are going to happen because I've gotten my needs met. They have a feeling of positive self-worth, and they believe that others will see their strengths. There's some optimism about the future, and that there's a belief that they can positively impact their world. What they do will make a difference, and if they do well, they'll get rewarded for it, and they bring that mindset into adolescence and adulthood. Conversely, when people experience developmental trauma, there becomes a basic mistrust of others and an inability to depend on others because others have not been there to protect them or take care of their needs. There's a belief that the world is unsafe and a belief that bad things will probably happen because that's what's happened in the past. There's an assumption that others might not like them and may harm them. There's a fear and a pessimism about the future because they believe that it's not going to be okay, and they really believe that no matter what they do, their life is not going to be any better. They believe that things will go badly no matter how hard they try. That is an incredibly pessimistic slide in one way. And there's another just thing that happens, and it happens as the result of people in schools like you, and that is kids learn something different. We are going to be talking about some of the things that we can do to help that. Fortunately, the brain is a flexible organ, and there's this concept called plasticity, which just means that the brain can change, and those belief systems can change over time. So trauma's impact on escalation just means that people who have experienced trauma are more likely to register danger because they're looking at it or they're looking for it. And even in safe situations, they may have a tendency to misinterpret that safe situation and interpret it as dangerous. So an example might be somebody's walking by out in the hallway when they're in class, and the person out in the hallway drops something and it makes this really, really loud noise. People who haven't had a trauma history may think, oh, somebody just broke something out in the hallway or something fell on in the hallway. Kids who have experienced a lot of trauma in their lives may be triggered by that and think, oh my God, somebody just got hit. The second slide, one of the things that they may do in that situation is run to the door to find out what happened, because they may need to know what's going to happen to other people who may be in a fight in that, or if there's a fight, they need to find out what's going to happen because they think that's probably going to happen to me. I'm going to be in a fight and I need to know if somebody's going to take care of me. Patterns in the brain are responsible for that. When people feel threatened, they move toward that lower part of their brain, and that inhibits good decision making. So trauma strips power and safety. Escalation is an attempt to get that back. And we are hardwired to do that. We are hardwired to fight or freeze or run away. And those are kind of the three big hallmarks of escalation, especially in our schools. The fighting becomes a really, really big deal. It's important that we recognize the other ones too, because lots of times kids can be traumatized and just show it by freezing, and it's important that we recognize when that happens as well. This is a YouTube video. It's a really, really good one. It's about 3.5 minutes long. And this is just kids that are talking about what happens to them. There are two takeaways I'd like you to think about from this. And the first one is I will fight to the death with anyone that tells me that kids want to be the way that results in them being under stress and being out of control. They don't like to be that way. And the reason I know that is because the things that cause them to lose emotional control makes them look weird in front of other kids. It impairs their ability to have friendships because kids don't trust them because they have a tendency to blow up. And that kind of stuff comes from trauma. And what kid would choose to grow up in an environment where they were traumatized? Absolutely none. And the second one is, it's talked about quite a bit in there, the importance of breathing in the calming sequence. Just helping kids learn how to breathe can be incredibly beneficial to them. So now is the time where you click on that link and watch the video and then come back. So now we're going to talk a little bit, and when I say we are going to talk about, I mean me, obviously. Some of the strategies that we can do before all of this happens. So this is kind of the stuff that we do in preparation for escalation. One is have a plan. One of the things that we can do before these escalations occur is talk about how kids can control themselves and even do some role playing about that. And that can include teaching self-regulation and emotional communication, like things like use your words. Many kids come to us without knowing any nuanced feeling states other than mad and okay. And part of our job is to kind of teach kids those more nuanced feeling states, because if they can identify a feeling like sad before it turns into anger, it can get dealt with before things get big. Relationship building activities. Relationship is by far the most important and powerful and impactful tool that we have with kids. And if we can form the kind of relationship with them that allows them to trust us, they will try new things. So rather than hitting somebody when they're angry, they may take our advice and listen to us and say, hey, let's try using your words. They have to know that we're going to bail them out and be helpful to them if it doesn't happen. And that's really the role of relationships. Relationships allow kids, when they're in that relationship, to take healthy risks. One of the things that I have the good fortune to do in my job is walk the halls a lot. And when I do that, I go around saying hi to kids that don't know me. And I try to engage them and just kind of goofing around and having fun with them, because there's a high likelihood that I'm going to get a call when that particular kid is under stress and escalated, because that's one of the things I do. And if I had a previous interaction with that student, they're going to recognize me as somebody other than just the guy that comes in and tries to kick their butt or get control of them. And hopefully what they'll do is remember me as the guy who made fun of my age with them. So I get teased a ton about my age, and kids call me old and all that stuff, and it's really, really fun. And I do things to use my age to form relationships with kids, and sometimes and oftentimes, just about all the time, it works really, really well. They'll say, "You're old," and I'll say something like, "How old do you think I am?" And if they guess too young, I will say, "Oh my God, you are my favorite student of all time, and you are terrible at guessing ages." Or if they guess way too high, it's been, I think the highest one is somewhere been in the 200s, then I'll say something like, "How did you know? You probably know that my first pet was a dinosaur," or something like that. And that just kind of has the chance of getting us off to a little bit different relationship. So I really encourage people to try to develop a relationship kind of before you really need it to help people calm. Another one is assessing the environment and just look for factors and risks that might escalate kids. some of those things might be, one of the things I mentioned was loud noises. Another one might be peers who are loud in the classroom, and just talking with them about that and prepping them and doing some work up front to help them prepare for when that happens can really go a long ways in avoiding the escalation. Listening, collaborating with them, and just noticing kids, even though they may not always admit it or even look comfortable with it at some level, they really, really want to be noticed and treated as important. And then the last one, the trauma-informed principles. That's what a lot of this is about. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Being watchful of what seems to be activating is really important. This is one of my favorite things. I just learned about this. I was at a workshop with a young woman named Catherine Haight, H-A-I-C-H-T or something like that. I'm really sorry. She was wonderful. One of the things she talked about was being the second chicken. And I love that thought and just the picture of that. So there is research that shows that if there is a big event in the chicken yard, like hail or a loud noise or something like that, if a chicken starts to get escalated and then looks over and sees another chicken that's just calmly going about and pecking at grit or food on the ground, that first chicken will mimic the second chicken and become more calm. One of the things that's incredibly important that we develop the ability to do is remain calm when kids are escalated, because if we can remain calm, the likelihood that they're going to look at us and see that they don't need to be escalated can really be increased. So being the second chicken doesn't really require much in one level, because we really don't have to do a lot except be calm. And being calm at those times can be very, very difficult, because sometimes, frankly, they are scary. Other things we can do when kids start to be activated is acknowledge the activating event. So if the activating event was them getting called a name by a peer, or they got escalated because they start to feel incompetent or dumb because the task is math, and who doesn't feel dumb when they're having to do math? Oh, wait, maybe that's just me. If we can acknowledge that and say something like, yeah, I know math is really, really difficult. I had a really tough time. I really understand why that gets you going. Or, yeah, I know that they called you a name, or I know that they do that and that's really annoying sometimes. I get it. Stick with me here. We can get through this without this getting real big, okay? A holding environment is just a place for them to be where stimuli or stressors can be minimized. Safety, trust are pretty obvious. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing what you can to follow the plan that's already been put in place. Hopefully there's one in place for this kind of event happens. Put that plan into place, because that's predictable for the student, and they may remember, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen when I get this way, and predictability can lead to safety. And then obviously adjust the activator. If the situation is someone's being called a name, get the aggressor out of the area or get the victim away from that area so the stressor goes away. This is just a kind of graph or a picture of what you would like to see happen in interaction between a staff person and a child. The one on the left is with co-regulation, and that's when things go well. A student is activated. That's the child line up on top. The teacher intervenes, and the teacher's energy or emotional activity or stress level is going to increase a little bit. But if that can remain much, much lower than the student can mimic that. If the teacher's goes up and stays up, the likelihood that the student's activity level and stress level is going to remain very, very high. And so that's just another way to look at what's supposed to happen when you're doing a good job being the second chicken. Just some other things about deactivation. Avoid arguing, avoid power struggles, because arguing and power struggles are generally indicative of an attempt to teach somebody something that they are not ready to learn right at this time. So be honest and reassure, manage your responses, do things like be empathetic, and that's acknowledging the stressor. Give kids warnings about what's going to happen next, and it might be something like, in a little bit, we're going to have to get out of the hallway because this isn't a good time to do that, but we don't have to do that right now. And give people time to kind of process this, and don't expect too much because their brains are not at their best right now. Reset the context. Just refers to resetting the environment and getting them kind of in a different space, both cognitively and emotionally and physically. Keeping things simple choices. Would you rather just stay here and talk to me, or would you rather go into my office? Or would you rather go into my office, or would you like to take a walk outside? Those kind of very, very simple things can make it easy for kids to respond to, rather than what do you want to do right now? Because that kind of an open-ended question may be much more difficult for them to respond to. Your self-regulation, that's being the second chicken. Yep, so I think that's enough on those. Physical activity can be really, really helpful. Getting them outside, burning off a little bit of energy. Find ways to empower them. Ask them what they need when they're ready to maybe answer that question. And do some active listening. Active listening just refers to, what I see happening here. I notice that you, things like that. I think it can be very, very helpful to, when we notice kids being angry, say, notice that you're really angry and sad right now. And if we say both, that can be one way that we can kind of give them a hint that there's something going on with them in addition to anger. And like I said before, that's a way that we can teach kids about nuances of affective states rather than just mad and okay. Look for a positive explanation of the behavior. One of the best example I can think about of this it's a really good one. During ESY, summer school, at one of the elementary schools out of Karner, Luke had an uncharacteristically good day. He had a really good morning. And for the last 20 minutes, there were 3 other kids in class. And kind of as a reward, at the end of the day, they were going to get to play sorry at the end of the game, at the end of the morning, just before the buses game, the board game, sorry. And again, Luke had a really good morning until the teacher said, okay, you guys did a really great job. We're all going to play sorry right now, just because you did so well. So the other 3 kids were pretty excited about that, and Luke blew up. I'm pretty sure he cleared everything off his desk, swept it onto the floor, and went to an adjoining room and slammed the door. Teacher went in and did not say that's inappropriate, because that would have been unhelpful. She went in and said, Luke, what happened? You were having a really good morning, and remember that phrase, what happened, because that allows kids to tell us what happened, and so we can figure it out and look for a positive explanation rather than us going in and say that's not okay. And then Luke said, I'm not going to play sorry, because every time I do, I lose, and every time I lose, I get mad, and every time I get mad, I hurt people. So Luke's escalation was actually a really, really backward attempt to be protective of his peers. So because a teacher approached it that way, she was able to say, oh, Luke, that's really, really nice of you. I'm really glad you're thinking about your peers that way. How about if we go out and play sorry? And if it starts to go bad, you and I will quit and we'll go for a walk or do something else. And then Luke was able to do that because he had this type of relationship with the teacher where he knew that he would be protected by her if it went bad. When it gets big, focus on safety. And that means both the physical safety of the child or adolescent and your physical safety. I'm a huge believer in sitting on the floor with kids. I spend a lot of time on the ground. Um, and the reason I do that is it allows me to take my physical presence and remove that as a stressor or as a threat. I'm not huge, but I'm fairly big and I'm bigger than most of the kids. And if I'm standing over them, that has a very, very different vibe to them than if I'm lower to them. Have to be careful to do that safely. And if there's any chance that you're going to get hit or kicked, do it at a distance or don't do it at all. But think about safety, and both for yourself and for the students. Remove things. So if there's a lot of things within arm's reach that can be tossed, like staplers or things like that, move them as unobtrusively as possible. I think the rest of those we've already talked about. So I'll keep going. Co-regulation just refers to being with kids with very, very little expectation. So when kids are really escalated, you can talk to them about things like their pets, their homes, their moms, God forbid video games. I hate talking about video games, but I do it a heck of a lot just because it's one thing that kind of helps kids get distracted from what's ever going on. And then after their minds are kind of calmed because they talked about something they like talking about, we can get back to whatever the stressor was. So returning to calm. It doesn't happen real quickly. And there is a time when kids start to de-escalate that they're very, very vulnerable to re-escalation because kind of returning to calm takes time. And it's important to remember that. So keep them safe for a while. And even though they say, I'm ready to go back to class, you might want to say something like, you've done a really, really good job settling down. I really like the way that you've done that. And that's finding something to praise. How about if we go for a walk, go into the gym and shoot 10 baskets, play one game of Connect 4 or Uno or something like that, just to give it a little bit more time. So that they can re-engage their emotional functioning, and we just feel a little bit more comfortable with their ability to manage themselves and more comfortable in them not being quite so vulnerable. It's really important at some point that the chain of events that led to that escalation gets discussed, and relationship repair can occur both with maybe yourself if it got big between you and that student. It doesn't really have to be that day. It's best if it's that day. But sometimes it's just better to do it the next day. And you can say things like, this was really, really hard for both of us. I really appreciate that you worked with me. I want to talk to you more about this, just about what happened. Let's do that tomorrow, okay? And most of the time they'll say, yep, I'm good with that. And that is it. This is just Pete Singer's a shout out to Pete Singer because he has been really, really helpful. So again, I really hope that if you have questions or comments or anything like that, or if you want to tell me how hard you were laughing at me and trying to get this thing shared on my screen, that would be great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.